Hello, and welcome back once again to the Inquisitor podcast with me, Marcus Cauchi. Today, my guest is Rebecca Gebhardt. She's a leadership consultant in the sales arena. She's an author, and today we're going to be talking about the passage from leaderboard to leadership. Without any further ado, Rebecca, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. Would you mind giving us 60 to 90 seconds on your history and what qualifies you to talk about the topic?
I began my sales career when I was 19 years old, and I was recruited to sell educational books and software door to door, 80 hours a week in my summers. And I did that, worked my way into leadership, left that company, and built an insurance agency around the country where I recruited, trained, sold insurance, and then launched my own consulting company in 2018. I needed help when I was a new leader, and I became very frustrated there wasn't a playbook. And so we have really specialized with helping this specific transition from sales to sales leadership, and believe that if you can set up new sales leaders to succeed early, that the ROI on their career is magnificent and it strengthens sales leadership pipelines at organizations. And
Lovely. We're in total agreement here. My belief is that we can start that runway in the previous job at the recruitment stage by asking the question, Rebecca, in 3 years, when you've been successful in this role, what's the next role that you want to be prepared for so that when you move into it, you hit the ground running? Because we're going to create a learning pathway so that you're ready and you're not going in and you fail on your first role. By putting that in place, I'm curious, if we bring that process forward, what impact does that have on the culture, on the expectations, on retention?
it has incredible impact on all of those. It is, most salespeople who are interviewing for a sales role, and I share a story of a sales leader who shared this as well. She's like, when I'm interviewing people, 9.9 times out of 10, it's like, what do you want to do? And they say sales leadership. So I think that that's a very common interview question, even in sales, but it is important if your organization actually has a pathway to get into leadership. But the whole setup of leaders communicating who they feel has potential for sales leadership is important. Organizations to structure the opportunities that exist in that organization that are either higher paying roles in sales or the sales leadership route, because many people see sales leadership as a reward for selling a lot. And I don't think that that should be a reward for selling a lot, because we know that prior success doesn't predict future success in a completely different role.
You go from
Yeah.
being an individual contributor to being someone who is responsible for the team's contribution and getting everybody over the line. Not very good to have someone who is selfish and entitled and a lone wolf.
Correct. So this is what we help people distinguish, whether they be an individual sales leader and they want to figure this out for themselves because they're very motivated, or an organization who are trying to get everyone on the same page. You need to distinguish what makes someone successful in sales and what makes someone, the characteristics, the motivations, the skill sets, behaviors that make them successful in sales leadership. Because what you were just saying, you can be very successful in sales and be a complete disaster in sales leadership. Or I've seen countless people, phenomenal salespeople, phenomenal leaders, but it depends on the culture of the organization and what they stand for.
Context and values, again, critical in terms of how buyers buy, because we're always filtering first for risk, then opportunity cost, and very low down the totem pole, value. So, our job in sales, I believe, is to facilitate buying, because the buying process is broken in most organizations, especially now. They don't really know how to buy particularly effectively because there's so much noise out there and they can't hear the signal from it. So their buying process is one that's trying to systematize finding the best value, but that tends to bias towards the financial, tactical. On the other side, you've got tactical sellers who come with a supply side mindset, who are always thinking about their target, their quota, the number of dials and meetings that they have to go on, the proposals they have to do, and so on. And revenue seems to be more important than the relationship, which means that they're always starting afresh and they're not really thinking about the consequences that ripple through the organization. I'm curious, before I pontificate about my thoughts on leadership, what is a leader in your mind? How would you define a leader, and what's their function?
A sales leader creates the circumstances for their team to win. That's the simplest, and you can make that customized to anyone. But a sales leader's job is not to try to make someone do something they're not supposed to do. It's not to do the work for the person, which new sales leaders always want to come to the rescue and prove why they were given the promotion. So I'm going to keep selling, right? I'm going to show them how much I deserve this leadership role by doing my old role. But they create the circumstances for the team to win. And I say that we treat everyone the same, but we coach them differently. And when sales leaders can learn that, hopefully sooner in their leadership journey than later, you just get more out of people. And that might be, the process that you have everyone use, or the ability to see the big picture, what you were just talking about, some tactical things versus strategic. That is an intentional muscle and a shift that has to be made. And you keep building that strategic muscle as you rise up the ranks in sales leadership, right? But that's what I would say is creating the circumstances for your team to win.
Understood. Too often I see leadership set the conditions up and new hires up to fail. And they do so because of how they think. How they think defines what they measure, who they hire, how they compensate, promote, and the decisions that they don't think beyond the theoretical numbers on a spreadsheet in terms of the human consequence. And we have this culture of individual contributor, which creates the selling approach of being very tactical, very short term. It's this quarter, maybe you look out to next. But normally you're so busy because you've got hundreds or thousands of accounts to cover, and you've got dial quotas and meeting quotas and proposal quotas and demo quotas and revenue quotas, and you're in meetings and you're chasing reports, and you're spending your time 2 hours a day just trying to navigate your tech stack because that hasn't been coordinated. It's grown like a Frankenstein monster, largely out of envy as people went into an arms race during COVID and the last few years. And 27,000 MarTech and sales tech companies appeared on the scene. And now we have AI. Now, there are a lot of those companies, but they're going to kill off quite a few of the software companies because they can do what they do without the headcount. But again, people aren't thinking, how do we use AI as a human partner instead of as a way of cheapening the balance sheet and cutting heads? That shift from being tactical to strategic, I don't think has happened in most cases, because you wouldn't see the inhumane approach to leadership. How many was it? 365,000 tech staff laid off last year?
I don't think sales leaders are jerks. I don't take that quite, and I don't think that's what you were really saying. You definitely didn't say they were jerks. There are focused on the wrong things. But I believe, this is what I truly believe, that everyone wants to be great. Everyone wants to contribute. The people who are so self-centered and are looking out for themselves, they will find success once or twice and they'll get sifted out, right? They will get sifted out. But that tactical to strategic, how you view your time, there is real pressure in sales to hit the quarterly quota. That is real, and that pressure is real. And people are reacting to that instead of taking a strategic approach, a big picture approach, a vision and purpose approach of what are we really going after, what matters now, what matters later. And I have a saying where we want to win today and set up tomorrow. The strategic thoughtfulness, that's not even a word, thoughtfulness of going from sales to sales leadership is, it's tactical to strategic. but how you view time is very different as well. You think in carrots and quotas and quarters. When you're in sales and leadership, you got to be thinking out 2, 3 years. And I know you can't predict 2, 3 years. There's too much going on. There's too many distractions. But to answer these stats of there's players, there's distractions, we're doing it because the competition's doing it. There is so much information and it really confuses people. In sales, a confused prospect doesn't buy. In the sales leadership context, a confused employee won't act. And so your job as a sales leader is to simplify things, focus on what really matters, and then drive that and communicate that through your team on what matters. If managing behaviors matters, then it matters. If looking at the big picture, there's going to be different times. And this is why these generalizations, it's so hard to give sales advice and sales leadership advice because it's different based on the circumstances and what's happening in the moment. But sales leaders and the great salespeople must pull themselves out of the whirlwind. They have to spend time thinking and strategizing and asking, checking their biases and their assumptions, right? Because what you were talking about, how you think is how you behave. I firmly believe that. And so you gotta check yourself.
Again, I think the clue here is the thinking. We're not really taught how to think. The last few years has been really instructive for me because I've had to design systems. So I've then had to go looking to become a systems thinker. And what's fascinating is when you design your sales process and your management process with the customer at the heart and their outcome, their job to be done in mind, you can balance where you spend your time, how you see time, and the outcome of your time. And the challenge that every sales leader is facing is balancing up revenue, strategy, and relationships. They tend to overbias towards the revenue. You've only got control over some of the inputs and only limited control. I have the 30-39 rule. You only have control over 30% of what you believe you have. And then of that, only 30%, which leaves us 9. But that 9 gives you enormous leverage and agency, choice. But you don't have any choice over the outcomes. You can influence them by the inputs, but if you have good strategy and you understand the job to be done, the mission, and the purpose is how it's executed, how we do things around here, the playbook, the culture, and then the most important part, which is most often the thing that's undervalued, is relationship. The focus on transactional as opposed to lifetime is wasteful. And the thing that really boils my blood is when I see leaders and managers encouraging their salespeople to do things that are short term and result in long term reputational damage, personal damage to how they are perceived in the market, what people say about them behind their back, the lifetime of referrals that are lost to them, the trust that's lost. How do we tackle that? Better question, because I think how we fix it is relatively straightforward. How do we attract the people who are open to seeing that change and swimming against the tide in their company? That's a better question.
Yeah. While you're recruiting, you recruit for values and culture first and then role fit. And I dive into the whole recruiting process and culture and coaching about relationships over results because they produce results.
Just expound on that because that's really important.
The relationship, and this is a Gallup stat. If you look at any of the research that's done by any reputable company, they say that 70% of the variance of someone's production is based on their relationship with their direct manager. So in sales, you are in the relationship business. Some sales are transactional, but in sales leadership, you need to make sure you're a person who can really dive in and build relationships with people, not relationships with customers. You're like, hey, I'm on a 90-minute Zoom. And then you go back to who you are. Like your coworkers see you all the time. Your direct reports really know you. And so You build the relationship by understanding the person, what they want, how they can get what they want out of aligning with your team and your company as they help both visions come to reality. Something I truly, truly believe in. The organizations who have leaders who are doing manipulative things and short-term gains, I don't work with them. So I can't help
Okay.
them. And if there was like, I don't really want to, if I'm out of aligned on values and culture, and if I don't believe a prospect of an organization, they need to be building sales leaders for the right reasons. We're great to work with.
I would take it one step further that it would be misselling to sell to them or to take their money, because if you did, it would be a mismatch and you would be doing it knowing that they wouldn't benefit from it because they wouldn't implement it or
Yep.
they'd kill it. I have exactly the same rule. One thing I always look at is the value of people's time. And if you're a CFO of $100 million business, I don't know, your time's worth what, about 50 grand an hour? I better turn up prepared, and my questions better educate and empower you, because otherwise I've got about 2 minutes in front of you and maximum 10. And if I want to get invited back, I need to leave you with a sense that I'm your ally, not your adversary, and not that I'm trying to dip my hand in your pocket, but that I'm going to help you make the right decision. Because at that level, if you're involved, you're filtering first for risk. Am I going to make the wrong decision? Is it going to come back and bite me? Then opportunity cost. If I spend the time, the money, the effort, the resource on this, what happens then? What alternatives could I do? Is it good value? Value comes last in that triumvirate and low down the food chain, because if it triggers the risk factor, any form of uncertainty, the brain's default setting is the worst case scenario. It goes into catastrophizing. They turn into Chicken Little and the sky is falling on their head. Then you've got the opportunity cost. If your stuff isn't significantly better than the status quo, they're going to stay stuck because change is very attractive. It's got a magnetism about it. So, how do you break the magnetism of the status quo? We have to find what's intrinsically important to the other person. And if you're selling enterprise, to the other person's multiples who have different agendas, they come in and out at different times. That isn't really aligned with a fast transactional culture where you're trying to squeeze every ounce of juice out of the lemon, but you then end up destroying perfectly viable business. I had one client who was smart enough to resist pushback to try and close a deal, which would have killed the relationship. And he ended up generating 200,000 a year for 3 years as a result, extra by not following his manager's advice and taking the beating. But why do you have to do that?
There's a lot of pressure. There's so much pressure on people. So if the sales leader is pressuring because the sales leader needed to hit quota to get their bonus or whatever it is, right? Or they just, the sales leaders' heads are on the chopping block more than any other executive.
Mhm.
It's high turnover, it's very high stress. And so, and I think we've all made mistakes in that seat. I have made mistakes. I
Oh,
have, you know what I mean? Like
yeah.
focused on activity in the wrong time and pushing through. And because sales is just full of high performers who make things happen. And I think we've all been there. I think we need to give each other grace in those situations. But again, this goes back to taking a step back, thinking strategically about something. Is it worth it to go all in on this? Will it help or hinder the future relationship? And good thing the salesperson was thinking more strategically about that. And here's the thing, too, sales leaders don't have all the answers. This is why I think it's so hard for people to get into sales leadership, because they're in the role and they're like, I can't ask for help. I'm supposed to know what I'm doing. I'm the one who has the answers. And just like in great sales, you don't need to have the answers. It's, what is the saying, Marcus? It's, you can tell how clever someone is by what they say, but how wise someone is by the questions they ask. I don't know who that quote is,
I
but
don't know who that's from.
yeah, but you
You
need
touched
to.
on something really
Oh, yeah.
important, and I've had a confirmation of an epiphany. What you're describing is the difference between someone who is insecure covering it up with a facade of purpose. And that's what we see about 2019, I think it was, or 2018. Jonathan Farrington did a study, and his study concluded that only 6% of managers were fit for purpose in sales out of a study of about 1,000. In all honesty, I'm stunned it's that high, because the path to management is normally accidental. It's a tap on the shoulder. Rebecca, we need to have a chat. And you think, oh God, I'm being fired. Then they say, I'm afraid we've had to fire your idiot boss. So there's a sigh of relief. And then they say, you're now the idiot boss. Off you go. Congratulations. And that's your runway into management. Does that pretty much mirror your experience of what you've seen in corporate?
Yes, yes. That's why I have a business right there. That's why we niched with emerging sales leaders.
Okay.
It's not that people are a bad fit. Sometimes they are. It's the individual sales leader's responsibility to get their head right, and it's the organization's responsibility to train them. But the process is messed up. The status quo of how we promote the whole process is messed up. So if the process is messed up, you're not going to get the people you thought you were going to get. Or
sales is like many other professions. They take some time to catch up with reality because they're comfy and they're fat, dumb, and happy, basically. In 2023, around February time, the context changed. The big private equity firms suddenly decided that you had to make a profit and collect cash, which was an alien concept with 16 years of leadership in the sort of boom time of private equity, when no one learned how to make a profit or collect cash. They learned how to grow revenue on paper, collect logos, and build fictional pipeline, because that drove valuation in the Ponzi scheme that is private equity. Net result now is we've got a bunch of companies that are led by people who have been basically set up to fail because of the business model. You made the point right at the beginning that the individual contributor role is very different from the manager role. We've got so many of these managers being accidental in that journey as well. And it's a pat on the back. Rebecca, you've done really well. You've crushed your quota for the last, eight out of 12. And the others, you were close. And there's no one else left. And we're too cheap to go out to the market. So congratulations, you've been promoted. And then you're expected to move from being one of their peers to one of their bosses. And you've got no idea what to do. So then you do what's familiar and you revert back to what you learned first or what was done to you. These people have 7 to 8 reports on average. In the UK, that means there's about 19.6 million people who have an accidental boss, an accidental manager. You have a much larger population. I suspect it's probably about the same ratio. That's about 50% of the adult working population. Given how influential the manager can be in a destructive way if they don't know what they're doing, what would you say to leadership and particularly shareholders?
it is what I say to leaders when I'm on discovery calls or when I'm sharing something on social media or I'm sending something out, video or interviews like this. The amount of money and time you invest to create the right habits and mindset in the beginning is an ROI that helps scale a team and someone and your organization is less expensive and it's quicker than waiting. What most people do, it's an average of 12 years between someone gets their first leadership promotion and when they get their first leadership training. That's a Harvard review or business review stat.
The
But
terrifying statistic.
it's terrifying.
12 years of guessing.
That was a stat I read. I'm like, I need to go all in with sales leaders. I read that and it completely shifted. I went, this is a huge problem and no one's tackling it. But it's less expensive to invest early when people are coachable. They're less coachable. You get money in your bank account. This is what happened to me, right? Like there's extra commas, there's accolades. I must know everything I must know. You become less coachable.
Memento mori.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So for those of you who are not familiar with it, when a Roman general was being given a triumph through Rome, there was a slave whispering in his ear, remember, you'll die one day, just to keep his feet on the ground. And ego is the enemy. We've got to watch for our ego and attachment, because we're afraid of losing what we've got more than we want what we could gain. And until we can find the intrinsic motivation, then that magnetism of the status quo is too great. So what we need to do as sellers is find the intrinsic motivation of our customers. As managers and leaders, we need to find the intrinsic motivation of our people. That way, they come to work for their reasons instead of ones we try and force on them. Again, tell us a little bit about the data around this, just in case shareholders are listening.
Now you got me all revved up here, Marcus. This is
I'm going on mute. You've got 5 minutes.
no. The intrinsic motivation, sales is way too extrinsically motivated by far, right? If sales leaders can simply sit down because they have established a relationship with their sellers, they figure out what that person wants and they help them get it. You don't need an end of the quarter bonus. You don't need to be selling them on why they should be doing something. See, salespeople sell. The best salespeople listen, right? But you sell, then you get into sales leadership and you sell, and you forget, let them buy, right? Great salespeople let their customers buy. Let your sales team buy. And they buy what they care about. But what you're talking about too is this extrinsic to intrinsic, how we attach our identity. This is part of the human development that we're all in. And we do leadership circle assessments with our clients. And this is a very hard thing, Marcus. Most people don't get there. Most people are operating in my identity is my paycheck. My identity is my job. I am nothing if I don't perform. And it's really hard to get out of there. 20% of people are focused on the purpose and the vision, and they're intrinsic and making the world better. So what you're saying makes total sense. The reality is 80% of salespeople and people aren't there. And so how do you meet someone where they're at? They care about what they care about, but it's this shift, this intrinsic, it's a journey I'm on right now myself, never stops. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't agree more. I mean, when you find why you do something so that you get up in the morning, you do it for free, it's not work anymore. The stuff I do today, I wake up at ungodly o'clock. I go to sleep at ungodly o'clock, having done hours, and it feels like a blink. Quite often it's 4 o'clock, and I've been going since 5 a.m. And I think, oh, maybe I should have some breakfast. And it just baffles me why we would spend so much time creating roles that are so hard that don't need to be. Our job in sales is to facilitate buying. The buying process is broken. Linear sales methodologies that were designed before we knew anything about how the brain functions and neuroscience, and that includes all of them, pretty much. You've got some really great research-driven stuff like corporate visions. Challenger was brilliant, but the problem is that people learned how to weaponize it in the same way that they learn how to weaponize bonding and rapport and trust-building skills and listening. Yeah, active listening is a brilliant skill. And then people use it as a weapon. So it's no longer a tool for building rapport and creating a human-to-human psychological unconscious bond. It's an attempt to coerce, manipulate, and get your way. Well, we shouldn't be doing this. And I think the questions we should be asking are fundamental. Like pain discovery. Everyone talks about pain. I taught it for 16 years. But think about the neuroscience of it. If you're in a relationship with someone and you take them to a place where they are remembering the most painful experience or the most recent painful experience and reliving it so that you can get something out of it at the end, is that an act of love or coercion? Which?
It's coercion. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's not, it's
So we need to manage with love.
pain point. It's important to know what their pain point is, right? But the solution isn't their vision of what they want to have happen and what's possible.
Exactly. It's the miracle question. Rebecca, imagine tomorrow the one thing that is impossible for you had disappeared. What would be different? What would change? Okay, so if you could make the impossible thing happen instead, and you focused your attention on that, would that be a better use of your time? I
think we make things hard. I share this story quite often, but when I was a kid, I grew up in the Midwest in the United States, and I still live in the Midwest, but we were taught it's called a Midwestern work ethic, right? There were a lot of farmers and you just work hard and hard work will pay off. I took that to mean that work has to be hard. And I think sometimes we get into this, and especially in sales, is I got to grind it out. I have to be miserable. I gotta remind my prospects about why they're miserable, because then I'll deserve the commission or I deserve the sale if I was tortured, in the process. And you don't have to be. Now, you do have to have persistence. You have to be able, there are a lot of challenging things that happen in sales, but those are the things that make it worthwhile. They're the things that make us incredibly proud when we achieve great things. But I do want to make a comment about what you said about, you're up at 4. We talked a little bit before, we got into the interview. I cannot operate on the amount of sleep that you get. I need a good 9 hours of sleep. I can get by with 8, but I need extra under eye concealer on those days. This is something that high achievers need to be very careful of, is because the people that burn out, in the next book, the whole chapter devoted to energy management and the stress and just what people are experiencing now and how to build our capacity in this regard. I'm not saying what you're doing is wrong because it works for you, but the high achievers, the ones who love their jobs, who cannot turn it off, are the ones who are at most at risk of burnout. And you just came back from holiday, right? And if you are that type of person who you're just having fun, right? It's like, this is joyous. It feels like work. You're able to balance yourself out, right? You just did your workout. It's like this. That is healthy. And obsession with work because you feel that's dangerous. And sales attracts those high performers who really want to be seen, right? And so it's
a fundamental human need called significance. And if 2 or more of your fundamental human needs are not met, you will actually override your value system until they do get met again. Now, what's really interesting about this is good people get deviated because of the pressure they create for themselves, and then they end up succeeding towards self-destruction. And so they get burnout, they get estranged from their families, they get isolated. The more successful they are at work, the more they use it as a crutch. They hide behind it. They then end up getting a 3rd divorce, and their kids don't want anything to do with them. They burn out. They get heart attacks. It's just insane. And those middle managers, they're put upon by 4 different levels. From above, they can get fired. From below, they can get sued and then get fired. They can get hassled and given grief or obstructed by their peers, and they can get sued by their customers. It's a horrible position to take on if you don't know what you're doing, and it's irresponsible to hire people and then throw them in at the deep end with concrete shoes. We worked with a company that trained 32 of their managers how to become operational coaches. So basically coaching on the job in the moment. And instead of problem solving, they asked questions and had the other person solve the problem and own it. In 6 months, they reported back a 423x, $423 back for every $1 invested over 6 months. And it was a gated learning pathway. So they could not move on to the next bit of learning until they reported back what they'd actually implemented. Now, the average when you do this with managers is a 72x return on investment over 6 months. When you compare that with the cost of not doing it, it does seem somewhat fiscally irresponsible, doesn't it? If you were the CFO, wouldn't you be spinning in your grave?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's ridiculous. The ROI on leadership development is bonkers if it's done well and it's done right. And we could talk about instructional design at a different point, but you can't just do training to say, oh, we check the box. Hey, come work with us. We do leadership development, or all of our leaders loved leadership development. That's not the point of leadership development, right? The point is to help elevate leaders and empower them so they can empower the people around them. The coaching aspect of just asking questions instead of being the rescuer, right? This is a distinction, the transitions that I talk about When you're a salesperson, when your customer needs you, you're more successful, right? They're like, oh, I need this. We need their product. I need their help. You're like, great, we got this. As a sales leader, the more your team needs you, the less successful you are, the more reactive. You can't be proactive, right? Like, I have a problem. And you're like, tell me your problem. Aren't I so smart? Look, I deserve this, And when companies flip that, what you were just talking about, when leaders flip it, and they don't do it on purpose, that just they're bringing habits. They are watching what previous leaders did. And
They do what was done to them.
yes, yes. The ROI on leaders, if you are doing sales training and you're not training the leaders who will implement that training, you are wasting all your money.
And they
That is
have
a
to
very bold
reinforce
statement to
it.
say, but yeah, you're wasting money.
What we need to do is we also need to look at how HR treats all of this as well. When you buy training, there are 7 different stakeholders, but normally only 1 or 2 are actually involved. You've got the person whose money is that's being spent, and then you have purchasing or the CFO. You've got HR. Finance cares about getting either the lowest cost or the best value, depending on whether they're tactical or strategic. HR, normally, it's a ticking box exercise where they're simply trying to meet some form of standard. So they can say, in the UK, we have investors in people. I'm sure you have something equally banal over there. For most people, it's a tick box. They go through the exercise because they have to in order to attract talent and compete in the employment market. But they don't really mean it, because when they come here, the job you sold me, the culture you sold me, is wildly different from the one I bought.
Strategic HR departments don't think that way. They aren't
Right.
checking the box, but tactical ones, absolutely. And again, I don't work with tactical HR departments. It's very strategic because it's aligned. All the training is not just aligned to get revenue now. It's about recruiting, it's about retention, it is about aligning with the strategic overall strategy of the company, with the overall vision. It is strategic. It's not this one-off type of thing. But yeah, but they can be. And you have to be sure you know who you're talking to.
Absolutely. But again, customers aren't involved in the design or in training. Salespeople aren't involved in the design or training. The marketing needs to be involved. I would have procurement involved in the role plays, but they're not involved. And you've got all these different people with different objectives. And the customer's this forgotten afterthought at the end of a long chain of abuse, because sales organizations are focused on the supply side. The customer's the needle. Let's go looking for them in haystacks, as opposed to having the customer bring the needle to us by being relevant, by being timely, by being valuable, and by tracking where they are in their buying journey, i.e., focusing on the demand side and the job to be done, the outcome that they want. If we do that, sales cycles are about 30% as long. If you do it really well, you're closing north of 80%. And your peers are closing, what, 9%?
The very first company I worked for was, as I had mentioned, it was door-to-door sales, and we just went door to door. And so it was not, no one, they didn't, 20 minutes, I left their house with a
No.
check. They didn't know what they wanted. There was no demand. The whole part of that entire sales cycle was to create demand and to do it in 20 minutes or less. Like literally, they didn't buy in 20 minutes. I was like, I got to go to my next person because it's all about a numbers game. Yeah, listening to the voice of the customer, having focus groups with your customers. You just said salespeople aren't part of the sales leadership process. They absolutely should be. Getting feedback from what your sales team wants out of their leaders is an easy thing to do. I was at an event last
They
week
won't
or the
hold
week.
back.
Yeah, and it was, yeah. And anyway, she said she did that with focus groups with the salespeople to help the sales training. And I was like, yeah, I don't know why people don't do that.
I'm working on a project at the moment for a company where we're trying to align procurement and sales and train them together, because the total cost of ownership, the cost of goods sold, availability of supply, sustainability of supply, certainty of supply, all affect sales, all affect the customer. They are part of one big system. There is a value chain. And unless we start recognizing that and recognizing that we are components within a system that has interconnections and different moving parts, and our customers have the same problem, so we have to help them navigate their own organization, sell internally, understand what the motivations are of other people, get referred by those people, and make sure that they look good for making the referral. Not this brute force and volume numbers game that's driven by pointless metrics. If you're in a culture where someone is put, you're in that metric madness, how do you stand apart and survive? Because you've got to walk the tightrope, keeping your bosses happy and meeting quota, keeping your customers and partners happy while staying true to yourself so you don't burn out or feel hollow inside because you've had to compromise your values.
You look at the metrics and you actually listen to what the data says instead of using those same metrics. I had a sales organization that I worked with that they were tracking their first year salespeople production, but really not their experienced. And when they looked at they were like, here, you got to get your calls. We work really hard, right? Like just go get a bunch of activity. And what they realized with looking at the metrics is that when you built relationships with customers and referrals, they did the process different. Their closing percentage went up, the average deal size went up. And so they completely, well, they tested it, right? But they used the data instead of being like, this is what you have to do. And then those salespeople who needed to do more behaviors and more numbers they had to do that. I was that type of salesperson. I had to outwork better salespeople with higher closing percentages until I understood it. And sometimes that's just how you are. But there are differences. There are those unicorn salespeople, they don't have to see as many people. Don't make them. This is why I'm like, treat everyone the same, but coach them differently. But you can use that data. Stop using the old benchmarks if life has changed. That drives me nuts.
You've created another strand of argument for tracking this one piece of data, which is the value contributed to the job to be done. Everybody in the business should be tracking against that piece, that one metric, because if we know what their contribution is, then we can be certain of the outcome. And we can track very quickly because we can see where there are patterns forming. We can see what happens in response to a changing context so that we can see where we need to focus our attention. But the normal reaction to tough times in sales is throw more shit in at the top of the funnel. And that creates a negative ripple effect of extra pointless work, following up on people who cannot, should not, or will not ever buy. So don't create that stuff in the first place. The syntax that I finally learned after 35 years in sales, or however many it is, what's the outcome I'm trying to achieve? How well am I doing against it? What's not working? Let me stop doing that. All of a sudden, I have time and bandwidth and space to think. What works? Is there a way that we can make it work better? What would work best? Is there someone who's already done it anywhere on the planet, in any sector, in any segment, that I can steal how they did it and apply it in my context? Then, before I test the river with both feet, test, and then scale and multiply. And any process, any value chain that fails to deliver the intended outcome, 80% of the time or better, goes into triage. And it's either amber, red, or blacklist. If it's 50 to 80% effective, it's the amber list. If it's 5 to 50%, it's the red list. If it's 0 to 5, it's the blacklist. And the worse it is, the bigger the upside. Because all of a sudden, by stopping doing that thing, I create masses of time. And then we can focus on what matters most.
Mm-hmm.
How easy is that?
It sounds easy, but we are just complicated humans with big emotions that just keep running around in the world.
Yeah. So it's the wetware that's the problem.
What's kind of crazy, I had a call with a woman earlier this week. We were talking, and she's also a consultant. And Marcus, this is going to sound kind of crazy. We're sitting here talking about where our business comes from. And I went, my business comes from referrals, which I knew. with the book launching and me being in direct sales for 15 years,
Mhm.
I was taught to just go out and pound the pavement, literally pound the pavement. And so I will send LinkedIn messages and I will call people and I'm prospecting, because I believe activity brings results. We can't just sit back and wait, like, oh, I'm just going to set an intention and people are just going to come to me. I had this, which sounds crazy. Most of my business has come from a job well done and a referral. And I have personally recently wasted a lot of time myself. And again, I help other people see their blind spots. I can't see my own. For the leaders or the salespeople listening and watching this, when was the last time you just talked to somebody and had them challenge your assumptions? You actually took a minute. We were talking about strategic thinking. This has been sprinkled all the way through this podcast, but just taking a time to reflect and say, where is that 20% that 80% of your business comes from? And it's an easy thing to do, but we're so distracted, right? We're so freaking distracted with what we see other people doing. And I go there to them, they're finding, and it's just like, it'll be okay. Like, just
Well,
figure it out.
it took me a while, but I haven't done a cold call since 2004 because what I realized very early on was that if I can find a way to sell hot, not cold, I can increase my close rate by about sixfold. I can shorten my sales cycle to about 50 to 30%. I typically get about 4 times more referrals, and the average initial order value is 2.5 times bigger. So I systematized that. But then I started thinking, well, I read a book by Greg McKeown called Essentialism. And the basic premise is do less but better on purpose. My motto since then has been double the money for half the work. And all my systems are designed to do that. So I created a whole system called Sell Hot, Not Cold. So even if you are brand new to a company, a country, and an industry in a new company, within 18 months, you can be top of the leaderboard. One of my clients has just done that at Chorus, and he's the number one salesman in Chorus worldwide. And I had another one who did that moving from Australia to Ireland, and he got to be the number one on their leaderboard in 14 months.
Yeah. So, how do you take that then from sales and to say, what are the activities I have to do that will move the needle the most for sales leadership impact? Right. And it comes down to the relationships, your one on ones, the coaching you do. Yeah.
It also comes down to understanding the real job to be done. Let me ask you this. Why do we prospect? Why do we advertise?
Why do we do that?
Yeah.
It's worked before in the past, and you got to hit your numbers, those metrics that really matter, Yeah.
And our survey said no. We prospect for paying customers. That's why we prospect. We don't prospect for leads. We don't prospect for hitting quota. The purpose, the job to be done, is to attract paying customers who stay and then bring their wealthy friends. Now, if you design your system to do that, you do away with all of the pointless activity because you wouldn't attract non-buyers from your TAM. You would only attract your ICP. You would have metrics that would focus, for example, or targets to get your salespeople to spend 60% of their time in front of customers. And then once you've done that, 80% of their time in front of customers. It is absolutely possible. I can think of people like Nick Ryan and Kieran Cron that spent 75 to 80% of their time in their customers' businesses. And they were top performers, always, consistently, 17 years at quota.
Yeah. Figuring out the distractions that don't matter. It's like you want to do the things that matter for the reasons that matter with the people that matter in a way that matters. And how that's going to look is like different for everybody. But that is, yeah.
One of the projects I'm working on at the moment is Winback. So in terms of selling hot, past customers, you're probably already on their system. You're already past all of their compliance, security, and finance checks. You passed the legal. Procurement's already tried to beat the crap out of you. And if you win them back, they're typically going to generate twice as much revenue over their lifetime as a new customer will. they're more loyal, they will give you more referrals, and the 200 payoffs of speaking to your customers and doing customer interviews, you can then apply to improve your operations. Would it surprise you if I told you that 24% of all inquiries to the American health sector that went through to sales were because people who were trying to buy something couldn't navigate the website?
Oh,
Right. Can you imagine how much money is being lost just because they haven't spoken to the customer and no one's bothered to speak to sales or customer success? Just use
well,
your brain.
I think the point you're bringing up here is really quiet yourself. What is being missed? The way that you have looked at things, what's happening, you're looking at the numbers, what's being missed, but no one else, they're just kind of like a fish is the last one to realize they're in water.
Yeah.
It's kind of
Yeah.
like just around you, you don't really know it. Um, the most successful salespeople, consultants, leaders are the ones asking, why do we accept that as okay? Do we actually realize the impact of that? And I think that that's a natural talent of yours, and that's a huge asset that you bring to your clients to be able to take advantage of that, right? To teach them those processes. But with all the advances in technology, you cannot replace the critical thinking skills. And AI can only solve what you ask it. What are the
Exactly.
questions no one else is asking?
Precisely. And that is my joyous place. That's where I spend 18 hours in a day. It's asking it questions and trying to synthesize ideas and to work through problems through questioning. And now, what's fascinating about that is as a leader, are you using AI as a thought partner to help you with critical questions like, how am I wrong? One of the things that I love to do is an accusation audit. Check it out, put it into AI, and ask, whenever you're putting a proposition together, run an accusation audit. You don't want your customers to be throwing those objections out. You find out beforehand so you can remove the reason. Okay. Then a board of detractors. Wow. You tell it what it is. It's a bunch of CFOs, it's private equity, and you can give the full range of emotion. You can tell them what the outcome is that you want, but you want it to be objective and critical. An alien anthropologist is another great prompt to have in there if you're a leader or a salesperson, just to see where you're wrong, what you're missing. Don't let yourself be fooled. And when you come across a good idea, keep looking. That's why we have the test, test, test.
Yep. I am not the forefront of AI, but I am doing my work. I just completed an AI program that was 3 weeks long about prompting and looking at it and making sure you're not uploading confidential information from your company into, like there, you got to have safeguards, but how to use it as a companion to quicken the speed of your thinking. I wouldn't have thought about that, but that makes me think about, and then get off of AI, get into yourself. I think using these phenomenal tools to help us is such a game changer, but we have to practice. We have to do it. But persona, you tell it to be, you get different answers. I think it's really fun. It's really fun.
I got hooked on it when my friend Ben showed me how to use it. So I just instantly signed up. And the first prompt I asked it was, write me a sales report as if you're an Assyrian king following a victory. And it did a fantastic job. And I thought, this is a miracle. And the beauty is we can not only check ourselves, but we can also run it through some really sensible filters, which you can build or you can build, can get people in. But applying neuroscience, applying behavioral psychology and heuristics, applying bias filters so that you can see if you're overemphasizing or underemphasizing or you're missing something. As a leader, how you could not be using this stuff, the competitive disadvantage you're putting yourself at.
Staying up to date and relevant, it just takes a curious mind. And so the 3 words I say when I'm at my best is abundant, bold, and curious. It used to be creative, but I was just pumping out content and not listening. So I switched my C. And that's a phenomenal thing for salespeople to stay curious about their customers, right? About the next promotion, for just staying curious. And I think that that's harder the more experience we get for some, and the higher you rise up the ranks in leadership, because you go, I'm validated. I know this. It's why I was promoted. Just stay curious, whether it's about AI, it's about how to increase closing percent, whatever it is. Curiosity is really a characteristic that is very valuable, no matter what role you play.
I think the reason why salespeople often fail is because of culture and what they've been exposed to. They want to help. And if you speak to salespeople about their best sales, their best customer relationships, they get impassioned by it. It's like talking to someone they love. It's someone they really care about. They care about the work, the quality. They would not want to be without that relationship. And the customer wouldn't want to be without the relationship either. And it's a symbiosis. They become partners, allies, and they're sovereign. They call each other out. But yeah, this is stuff that persists. And you look at the top 4%, they didn't miss a beat when the market context changed. The next 16% who are above average performers, a lot of them hit a major glitch. They were used to being top of the leaderboard. They were used to being consistent above or at quota. And now they're barely able to get in front of a customer. They're tracking at 30 or 40%, maybe a little bit higher because they were slightly better performers, but the relationships weren't there. The top 4% cultivated relationships where people see them not as a salesperson, but as an ally, not an adversary, not an accomplice. What do we have to do to change our thinking if we've been brought up in that culture, but our gut is telling us this is wrong, this isn't me? How do we make that transition? What are
Um,
the questions we have to ask ourselves?
yeah, well, I think what helps, because massive change is really hard on some. And so instead of going, what needs to change, what needs to change, I think also asking questions of what can continue to work. We feel like we have to scrap everything all the time, and we don't have to. We get in these modes where we don't look at our inventory of what we're working with, right? We just go, then saying what needs to change? What did I get lazy about? Right? How did I take my foot off the gas? What has made the people, that top 4%? And then you can't just swing the pendulum if it's relationships, because it takes a while, but you can promise not to get yourself back in there by applying it. And I think, just again, confused people do not act. They get analysis paralysis. They get really overwhelmed. They're like, it's so bad. Where do I start? Just what's the next right thing that you can do? And that's going to be different, right, for everyone. And that's a hard question to ask. I'm answering it generalized because
Well,
it really
to build
depends
on
on
what you said, constraint. Limit the things that you need to do in any given day to the top 3 most important and run it through the filter. Is this going to move the needle in a significant way towards the outcome? How is it contributing to that? If it's not, then don't put that onto your list. And until those 3 things are done, you don't put anything else on. So you have to complete all 3. And I always tell people they need to complete it by 11 o'clock, because just get it done when you're fresh. And get the horrible stuff out the way. And miraculously, then the rest of the day is yours to do what the hell you like with. I've got a client at the moment who's just taken on, about 6 months ago, he's taken on the Benelux region for $1 billion manufacturer. And he was doing so well that they asked him to take on Nordics. He phoned me a couple of weeks ago complaining he's bored because he does both of those jobs in a total of 90 minutes a day. And he's already at quota. They won Coca-Cola as a client in the first 3 months. Now, that's how straightforward life can be. You can be bored in your really high-power 6-figure job and get the job done really well if you think and you stop and you ask questions. And the questions you've got to ask is, why am I doing this? Am I getting the outcome that I intended? And if it's not working, why do I carry on? Let's stop. Is there a better way? Okay, then go looking for that and spend your time on that rather than the pointless activity.
And it's not just about the result right now. That's why the top 4%, and it's like they were getting results, and it's about winning today and setting up tomorrow. So it's not just about, is it getting me the results? Because it probably is. And then everything changes. You're like, oh, I was missing that piece. So I think that's an important question to ask as well.
Exactly, because you have to walk the tightrope of keeping your bosses happy and meeting your target, or you get fired. You have to keep your customers happy because the first one doesn't get met. So everything has to hinge on that. So, for example, a common metric or an uncommon metric, but one that supply side leadership focus on is time to innovation. The time it takes for a customer to invite you in so that you can co-develop a product or a service or solution. But the thing that drives that is time to value, which is a customer demand side metric. And I think one of the most important questions we've got to ask ourselves is, does every job in the business have a window to the customer? Do they understand how their little tiny piece affects other people that ultimately affects the customer, because that affects share price? Because everybody in the business has responsibility for the financial health, the security, and the reputation of the business.
One of the organizations I work with, they're rated about $1 billion in sales, and we led a leadership development program around customer value, where there's these leaders, they have different, not everyone's sales, right? So it was the accounting department, marketing, IT, service, the technology, they all shared what the value was and how it helps the customer. And it educated their other co-leaders. The point of that was to get less siloed, to rely on each other, to treat each other differently. But it was then also an exercise to remind the leader who was sharing that they do indeed have a critical role in the success of the value that the customer receives. And as long as the customer is receiving that value, they will be continuing to thrive.
Interesting. So, I mean, in effect, the nirvana is customer-driven leadership with managers who have an operational coaching management style and customer-centric sellers who are collegiate and collaborative.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty much the nirvana.
Yeah.
So how do you design a business so it looks like that?
We don't have time for that today.
No. So, on the next call, lovely. Look, this has been an absolutely fascinating conversation. Thank you so much. Tell me this, you've got golden ticket and you can advise the idiot Rebecca, age 23, who knew everything, you're immortal and invincible. What would you say to her that she would have undoubtedly ignored but would have benefited?
Not everyone's fighting against you. The chip on the shoulder didn't need to be so deep. The world is conspiring to help you, not hurt you. So stop fighting your way to success.
Oh, that is a lovely way to finish. Excellent. So how can people get a hold of you?
You can check out our website, which is riseupconsultinggroup.com. The new book we have coming out, Leaderboard to Leadership, How to Earn and Excel in Your First Sales Leadership Role, will be available on Amazon on September 20th. And we have free resources that people can get access to right now. And we have a few things that are going to be put up in the next few days here about book clubs and organizations that want to order bulk copies, because the idea of this book, that the vision is that it becomes a guide for every individual sales leader, but a complement to every sales leadership development program. And so we have those types of things. And then you can find me on LinkedIn. I live on LinkedIn.
Rebecca, if you had one question that you would ask leaders and have them ponder, what would you leave them with so that they can leave this episode with something to chew on?
The question always revolves around their energy management, which impacts their focus and their ability. But how are you setting yourself up that you are able to bring your best self to work in order to bring out the best in the people you lead?
Fabulous question. On that note, thank you very much, Rebecca Gebhardt. This is me signing off from the Inquisitor podcast once again. If you have enjoyed this and you found it useful, then please like, comment, subscribe, share, tag someone who should listen to it, maybe your boss, and get Rebecca's book. Make sure that if you're thinking about moving into management or leadership, you're doing it for the right reasons. Because if you do it for the wrong reasons, it's a massive pay cut, a load of stress, and you'll wish that you hadn't. And at some point, you'll fail miserably in the job, get fired, and wish you'd stayed as an individual contributor. But you'll keep soldiering on because your ego won't let you. You need to be someone who actually cares about the success of others. You have to like coaching people. You have to care about transfer of knowledge without rescuing them and without micromanaging them. This is a really powerful skill set that sets you up for life. If you want coaching in that, Rebecca, myself, several others that I can recommend, happy to make introductions. But get in touch. And if you're keen to meet, then what I would suggest is you click the link for the selling aptitude test at the end of the blurb, then book half an hour with me. I'll debrief you on what the meaning of the report is, but essentially you will learn 3 things you didn't know about yourself, the state of your pipeline and why it's in the state it's in, the psychological condition that you leave your buyer in, i.e. your buyer safety score, and the areas that you can develop yourself without training or coaching by just simply thinking and asking yourself the right questions. So if that's something that you want to do and you're interested in coaching, then click the link and talk to me, ask me about coaching, because I won't even raise it with you. In the meantime, stay safe and happy selling. Bye-bye.